We know a lot about the data that we're going to collect and about the analytical objectives of the project. All of that is described in the description of action. But in between the data and the analysis and answers that we want, there are still important details that need sorting out, and they need sorting out before we start the data collection. So exactly how can we collect the data that allow us to operationalize the things we're interested in so that we can get the answers that we really want to get in order to have the impact that we want to have with the project. So in this brief video, I'll take you through 3 overview sheets that serve as tools for thinking through the process towards starting data collection. They lay out the analysis that we're going to conduct with the data and some of the frameworks that we know we're going to work with based on the description of action. These are the 3 overviews. The first one presents all the analytical background papers that we're going to write in work packages 6, 7, 8, and 9. The second sheet presents the analytical overview of migration processes from the application, from the description of action, with additional annotations, especially regarding policy. It also shows the work packages on the lower part of the second overview sheets, but I'm not going to talk so much about that. And the last overview sheet is another figure from the description of action that lays out the data collection and data processing. So the idea with the first sheet has been to use the background papers to guide the planning of the analysis, because all the analysis that we're going to do is going to take part in the background papers. And then policy briefs and reports will draw up on the analysis in the background papers. So the first column shows the deliverable number and the preliminary title. The second column shows which institution is responsible, which institutions contribute, and who is the responsible person for each of the background papers. Then the 6 columns with the red symbols show the probable use of data. So the big red dot shows what data we know we're going to use. And then I've inserted some question marks for the data that we might use. And the little angles that you see for deliverable 6.4, for instance, show that the survey data, qualitative data, and policy data all contribute indirectly to the truth table data. So all the red symbols are a way of thinking about which data will be used for which paper. And then extending from that, in the last 2 columns, I've tried to specify what, in simple terms, would be the independent and dependent variable in each analysis, because a lot of the questions that we've asked are of a causal nature. So how does migration in different ways affect development? So there are causes and effects, and the last 2 columns try to specify what they might be. So a big part of our job before we start the data collection is to think more in detail about the operationalization of these causes and effects. So for the first one, for instance, the multi-level determination of migration processes, we know that we're interested in causes that have to do with development or specific developments and policy in different ways. And we know that the effects that we're interested in have to do with migration. But would that be the prevalence of migration aspirations, or would it be actual migration? And then if it is actual migration, how do we measure that with the data that we have? Would it be migration of household members? Or in short, how do we go from concepts that we know we want to analyze to designing the data collection so that we have exactly the data that we need for all the different analytical tasks that we're going to undertake? Then right at the bottom of this overview sheet, you will see 5 key questions. And these are questions that we can think of as we plan the data collection. So how should the independent variables or causes be operationalized? And likewise, how should the dependent variables be operationalized? Then the third question, how can data collection in work package 3, 4, and 5 support these operationalization? So not just what would we ideally want, but also what is feasible given our resource limitations, for instance. And then the 5th question, what are the appropriate units of analysis in each case, so in each type of analysis? When should we be looking at individuals or households or research areas or countries, and how do we see those different units of analysis acting together in our different analysis? And the last question, what other aspects of analytical design might matter in each case, so in each analysis? How do we relate to the time dimension, for instance, possible lags between causes and effects? What do we do when there's the possibility that causality can go in both directions. So different ways of, in a way, playing devil's advocate with respect to the analysis that we plan and trying to come up with good solutions. The second overview sheet takes the figure of the causation of migration from our description of action as the starting point. That's the black and gray here. And then I've added red components to it to add the different ways in which policy might affect this process, and also to add the development outcomes that we're interested in. And I've added blue numbers indicating 3 of our background papers, which are the 3 that specifically look at mechanisms that are represented with arrows in this figure. All the other background papers essentially do that as well, but not in an equally simple way. So with a lot of the others, we have to ask, what aspects of migration do we see as the cause? Is it migration aspirations, or is it actual migration or failed migration attempts, for instance? And what are the different mechanisms through which they might affect development, and the other way around? So these 3 that are labeled are the relatively straightforward ones, and then the figure can be used as a tool for thinking about how we go about the analysis for all the other analytical background papers. Then the last overview sheet is another figure taken straight from the description of action that shows the process from the raw data that we collect in the field through processing it as initial output, and then going to the datasets and the relationship between the datasets. So one of the most important things here is how for instance, the survey data will, via the survey dataset, inform the research area truth table, which also takes its components from the policy database and from the qualitative data collection. There's more in-depth description of this in the description of action if you have trouble sort of following the logic of the figure, but it's useful for thinking of what exactly are we going to do with the raw data, and how will that feed into the survey dataset, policy database, and qualitative data, and how do those in turn inform the research area truth table. So as an example with the survey data, how can we ask questions that can allow us to construct variables at the level of each research area, which can be used as conditions in the research area truth table? And likewise with the policy review, for instance, how can we do a review of policy documents and interview policy experts in a way that allows us to set up the policy coding sheet with specific policy related conditions that are possible to identify and which can be used as part of the research area truth table. So with the help of these 3 overviews, we should go back and forth between planning the data collection in detail and looking ahead towards the analysis and trying to foresee exactly what data will we be needing at that point, and how can we make sure that we spend our data collection resources in the best way to achieve those objectives.